Welcome to Making Worlds, conversations about imagining otherwise. I'm Hannah McGregor, and on this show, I talk to cool people about fantasy, sci-fi, speculative fiction, magical realism, and I guess musical theater? And other genres that let us envision different possibilities for how the world could be. Today, I'm talking to somebody who's actually here for every single recording. It's Making Worlds producer, Zoe Mix, and we are going to talk about every theater nerd's obsession, the Phantom of the Opera. Zoe is a multidisciplinary Red River Métis artist, scholar, and publishing professional from Tacoma, Washington. She currently lives in Vancouver, BC, with her dog and soulmate, Sumo. Sumo is always frowning. In this episode, we're going to talk about the 2004 movie version of Phantom of the Opera, as well as the musical. Welcome, Zoe.
Thank you, Hannah. I'm very happy to be here.
I love this lip. This red lip. Incredible.
I went for past the point of no return realness.
Ugh, absolutely. Don Juan triumphant.
Yeah.
Tell me about your relationship to the musical Phantom of the Opera.
So, it all started an evening in 2004 when I was 9 years old, and my grandma said, we're going to sit down and watch the Phantom of the Opera. And I was like, who cares about opera?
Or phantoms.
Or phantoms. Anything with the word opera at the time, I was like, that's boring and old. And then we watched it, and my life was changed forever. And I was obsessed. And so essentially at that point, I started voice lessons. And I wanted to be an opera singer because of Phantom of the Opera. So
the fact that it was this particular adaptation that did that for you, I think is extra important because it is such a goofy, campy movie. So have you had the chance to actually see it as a musical performed?
Yeah, my grandma took me to see a bunch of musicals because she was a huge opera fan. She loved Madame Butterfly specifically, and Phantom of the Opera. And so she would take me to go see operas and musicals. And then she was like, oh, you're good at, you have a talent, because I had kind of a natural talent at singing. And so she paid for my voice lessons.
Oh, wow.
From the time that I was 10 to 18.
Wow. Thanks, Grandma.
I know. I wouldn't have been able to do it without her. So
had you seen operas before you saw Phantom of the Opera in 2004?
I don't think so. I had only been, because my grandma loved Madame Butterfly and Maria Callas, she would play Maria Callas, her albums. So that's all I knew about it.
Okay. So what was it about Phantom of the Opera that made you go I love opera and must now learn to be an opera singer?
Well, I think it's the camp of it, the spectacle of the movie especially, and also the musical. But it's it's every theater kid's dream to be the girl that's nobody notices in the background, and then to be brought forward and suddenly be the lead. That was my dream, and I really wanted that to be me. And so I was like, oh my gosh, if I get into singing really and all this stuff, this is going to be my future. And this possibility of me being able to use my skill or talent, I guess at that point, it wasn't a skill, was really exciting. And also the Phantom. I was really into Gerard Butler as the Phantom. I mean, let's be honest here.
I was really thinking, so I rewatched this last night in preparation. I generally refuse to watch anything for this show, but I am really committed to watching the 2004 Phantom of the Opera as much as humanly possible. 20 years old this year. Wild. To me, who still thinks of it as a movie that came out about 5 years ago. A thing that really struck me that I think has probably occurred to me before is that it's unbelievably goofy casting to cast Gerard Butler as the Phantom of the Opera because he is physically hot and bad at singing. And that's the opposite of what the Phantom of the Opera should be. He should be physically repulsive and great at singing. But instead he really can just barely sing these songs. It's really, he's on the struggle bus, particularly when he gets up into those sort of high tenor parts. And with the exception of approximately 4 square inches of his face, he is unbelievably attractive.
Yeah, I don't understand that choice, but I love it. Like, I don't know. I think did you have familiarity with Phantom before you saw the movie?
Yes. Yeah, because I saw Les Mis for the first time when I was maybe 4 or 5, and that spawned a passion for, I probably hadn't seen it. Ooh. Yeah, I had. Okay, so Les Mis had spawned a passion for musical theater, which I had very little access to in Ottawa. And so I sought out those cast, not only sort of audio cast recordings, but the recordings of the musical that you can just watch people. There's a Les Mis one. It's not a full performance. It's sort of Les Mis in concert.
I know which one you're talking about.
Yeah, and there's a Phantom of the Opera version of that I think is also Colm Wilkinson, the originator of the role of Valjean. I think he's also in the concert version of Phantom of the Opera. And I was such a Colm Wilkinson girly. Truly, probably my first real crush. This elderly Irish man and his beautiful voice. He's incredible. And he's such a perfect Phantom because, he's got this incredible voice. But yeah, I was familiar with it prior to seeing the Gerard Butler, let's think of any other, Patrick Wilson?
Yes.
As Raoul.
Emmy Rossum.
And Emmy Rossum as Christine.
It's crazy that she was 16 when she did the role.
Was she?
Yeah, she was 16. Gerard Butler was 35.
It's a lot of adult men touching her in very intimate ways. Okay, so take me into, you proposed this as you were like, I want to talk about opera. So what is it about opera? What about opera for you is a world-making form? What did being excited about opera via Phantom of the Opera lead you into?
So I've been thinking about this a lot, obviously, getting ready for this. And I've been listening to I listened to the musical, the original London cast with Sarah Brightman. And then I was also listening to the movie soundtrack. And I think that that Phantom of the Opera, the musical, doesn't like opera.
Yeah, no, it's making fun of opera pretty hard.
It hates opera. And so it's funny, because when I was younger, I didn't clock that. And now, having, being someone who's studied classical voice for, almost 20 years, which is crazy, I feel like it does hate, it hates what I've become as an adult. Okay. But I still love it. I feel like opera is when people sing, I guess the same happens with musical, but musical comes out of opera. It's just when someone has such heightened emotions, they can't just talk, they have to sing. And I love that. I feel like I have always had such big feelings, and I've always I don't know, just felt so attracted to music. And I feel like opera reaches that level of drama and that level of emotion that I feel inside. And singing it, being able to actually produce it is it's nothing else to me. It feels so good. Even just not even for an audience, it's a part of me that I can express myself in a way that I don't any other way. I'm pretty reserved as a person, I feel like. And when I sing, I'm able to bare my soul, as cheesy as that sounds, but Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I'm thinking about what you said about Phantom of the Opera hating opera, and it does poke a lot of fun at like classical opera and the way that it is staged and the way that it's performed. And a lot of that happens through the role of Carlotta, played impeccably by Minnie Driver in the adaptation, doing the wildest Italian accent anybody has ever heard. Her little dog, by what an icon. Uh, so you know there is some like teasing of this kind of era of opera, but also the mega musical as a genre, as a sort of larger than life, spectacular, um, melodramatic, and entirely sung through musical form owes a ton to opera. Like, I think part of what Phantom of the Opera is doing is Andrew Lloyd Webber being like, I'm going to do opera, but better than opera. Like, this is my opera. And so he's got, you know, a soprano as the ingenue doing these over the top virtuosic performances. You know, there's so many traditions of opera incorporated into this with a very sort of late 80s, early 90s, je ne sais quoi, big hair, so much synthesizer sort of going on. So much synthesizer. So I do see that like even while the actual substance of like what you since learned to sing might be what's being sort of made fun of in Phantom, the campiness, the melodrama, the over the top sincerity that sort of goes with this musical form, I think is like that Weber in general and this musical in particular and opera have that in common.
Yes, I completely agree. Like, I feel like he does a lot of the like sing through stuff, like Cats. Also, it's like all sung, and Les Mis is the same way. They do definitely have a heightened level.
Yeah, all the mega musicals are. They're all sung through. I learned this when we were doing the Material Girls episode about Les Mis. That's like one of the characteristics of the modern mega musical is that it's sung through. Which in the movie they take a couple, they try to like sort of naturalize some bits by taking what is sung through in the musical and having people speak it. But it sounds very silly because the lines rhyme.
Yeah, it is weird. I wanted to also talk about Carlotta, the character, because like I do think in the movie she's much more of like a comedic role. I mean, she's always comedic, but in the movie she's like a bad singer.
Mm-hmm.
She's not just like a diva, because in the show, in the musical, she isn't like a bad singer necessarily. Mm-hmm. She's more like just an opera singer. At least is what I noticed when I was listening to the cast recordings.
Okay, and what do you make of this decision to make Carlotta bad in the movie?
Well, I feel like it heightens her being annoying, right? Like it heightens it also like makes what the Phantom's doing seem more like just, I guess. I mean, killing people isn't okay.
But if they're bad at singing, you know.
Yeah, it's like, oh, she's annoying and bad at singing. So it's okay that we're trying to like kill her, you know? But in the show, it's like, oh, she's actually like, she's like an opera singer. She's a good singer. And she's annoying. She's a diva, which is definitely annoying.
Why does the Phantom want to oust her in the musical?
Well, partially because she can't act. Mm. He hates that. And then he also is just like, obviously he prefers the untrained kind of like ingenue that Christine, because Christine isn't an opera singer. Like she has operatic training. Mm-hmm. But the role was like originated by Sarah Brightman, who, you know, is that in towing that line in like the pop opera genre.
Assume that listeners have no idea who Sarah Brightman is.
Oh, listeners. Well, Sarah Brightman at the time of Phantom of the Opera was married to Andrew Lloyd Webber. And she So he wrote the role for her. And she's like a soprano who has like operatic and classical training, but she became well known because like she started doing this pop opera stuff. So she was like singing with like Andre Bocelli, if people know who that is. These like very popular opera pieces like O Solo Mio or whatever, and like Ave Maria. And they'll put on these like big concerts where there's like huge amounts of people, and it's like definitely how a lot of people get into classical music, I feel like. I mean, I loved Sarah Brightman growing up, and I loved Andre Bocelli, and it's like you know, a nice way to get into it, because I feel like opera does require a level of like homework before going to see one. Yeah, it's not fun.
Yeah, you gotta look up the plot because there's mostly not in English.
Yes. Yeah.
So when you say Sarah Brightman and by extension Christine are not opera singers, what does that mean?
Well, okay, the big difference is that they are mic'd. So
okay.
That's like the biggest difference between like musicals and opera, I would say, is like they require a mic. And like probably the singers that are in Phantom of the Opera wouldn't be able to amplify wouldn't be able to go over an orchestra without amplification.
Okay.
And it's like because Christine, like as a character, and the way that people sing her like role is that they're doing a lot more of like the belting style. Like she does kind of have that operatic thing because she goes up really high. She's mostly singing in head voice. And but she does belt. Like she has kind of more of that like contemporary sound.
What can you explain what the difference is between belting and how an opera singer would amplify their voice over an orchestra? Like what's the actual like how might one detect that difference?
So I'm trying to think of how to explain it, but like I'm just gonna say like Wicked is a really good example because Wicked is on everyone's mind. But like Elphaba, her character doesn't sing in head voice. Like so like sorry, this is a lot. Like, you know, when you're like have done something for a long time, it's hard to explain. But so essentially like in let's say like a soprano voice, there's like chest voice, which is like your lower part of your voice, which is like where you're speaking, kind of like our speaking range. And then there's head voice, which is going up high, like into the high notes that Christine is singing in Phantom. And then on top of that, there's like a whistle tone or whistle range, which is like the range that Ariana Grande hits. So essentially in like current Broadway and like musical theater, most like female or like soprano roles, they'll bring the chest voice up really high. So you're not actually going into like this other level of your voice. Like you're bringing the speaking kind of register up as high as possible, and it creates that like Elphaba sound where she's singing Defying Gravity, like the final notes of Defying Gravity when it's like really high. That's like she's bringing her chest voice all the way up, which is why it's so impressive, because it's like that's crazy.
Yeah. So that's the belt.
The thing with opera is that you want the instrument of your voice to be like one. So you want it to be like a clarinet or something like that, where it's like from the bottom to the top, there's no difference in the sound. Because naturally there's like a flip that occurs between the chest voice and the head voice. There's a flip in quality. And so what you're trying to do is make it seamless so that you can't see any difference. And I think like with Christine, there is a clear difference. You can hear it.
Well, what I am still sort of reaching for is what that has to do with miking. Like, why is operatic delivery louder and doesn't need to be mic'd? Because the sort of what you seem to be suggesting is that like musical theater delivery is mic'd because it won't have the volume that opera needs, and that there's something about the way operatic performance is done that will sound different to the contemporary ear that's used to pop singing.
Yes, it's like all about acoustics and resonance in the head. A lot of like opera singing, because it's not like you have it's just the training, because it's not like certain people have, you know, an operatic voice. I mean, obviously there's really big voices that sing like Wagner and like these huge shows, but it's ultimately like being trained to sing in such a way that like it's all focused out, and it's like supposed to go all the way to the back of the auditorium, and you're like resonating up in your sinuses and like in this forward place that you don't really do with contemporary singing.
Yeah.
It's just not doing the same thing.
Yeah.
So it's like a whole other sound.
And does that sound, do you think that it sounds, because I'm thinking still of Carlotta, like, does it sound bad to the contemporary ear? Is that part of the rejection of Carlotta as a character?
I feel like it does, because like I've played you know, opera singers, current opera singers like Renee Fleming, who's like one of the most famous opera singers of our time, and people don't like how it sounds. Like, especially when they're singing in the like that more middle range where we're used to hearing the belting.
Yeah.
It sounds weird to people. I just feel like it sounds more mature.
Yeah, I mean, Christine, like a big part of it, of her role, is that she is this very young, vulnerable woman who can be shaped into something. You know, at one point the Phantom basically says that like she's the face, he's the voice, that like he is using her as a puppet. And that like the figure of the ingenue as opposed to the diva is in part characterized by this like malleability. I have always thought of the Phantom of the Opera as a story about a woman choosing between career and marriage. She has the option either of becoming a great singer and performer and literally marrying the opera, or marrying Raoul. Part of the anxiety at the heart of the story, and this goes back to the novel, is like what if women had careers? Like, can you imagine?
Yes, and in the end, she goes with Raoul, which is such a downer.
She really does. And he really is.
And like, he doesn't even believe her throughout the whole show that the Phantom exists.
Listen, Christine gets gaslit a lot. Okay, so let's get further into this question of like, in what way does, say, musical theater in general, but the Phantom of the Opera in particular, allow you to imagine how the world might be otherwise?
I mean, I think that the Phantom's role has changed in my life since I've gotten older, for sure. Like, because I really identified with wanting to be the ingenue. And in like singing and especially opera, there, like, once you turn 30, you're no longer like a young artist or like so you go into crone territory essentially. So I'm like on the cusp of crone territory in the opera world. I guess it's kind of like depressing, because when I was in like the opera program, I like really wanted, like I was waiting for that moment when I was going to be discovered, because I was always in the chorus, never got a shot, and I was like really pretty in the background, or, you know, a very pretty piece of furniture, so to speak. And I was like, I really want this to happen for me. Like, it could happen for me. And there's this, like, even like in opera school, it's like the professors would say, oh, you never know what's going to happen. Like, you could suddenly have access to your upper register. Like, something could change for you vocally, and suddenly you have this like amazing instrument at your fingertips. So it's kind of like this weird, because like when you're young, like your voice doesn't really mature until you're like 25. So when, you know, all of us little guys in the opera program, like at 21 or 19 or 21, you're like, maybe I'll be something really cool. That dream of being that ingenue started with Phantom.
Mm-hmm.
And so I definitely lived through realizing that that was not going to happen for me. And it was very painful.
Yeah.
But now I think I look at Phantom just as something that changed my life. Like, it's not so
Mm.
much like the contents of it, but it's like the role that it played in my life of making me go into opera and making me love singing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not so much the world that it's creating. It's like,
Oh, it's the world that it created for you. And that's, that's such a major part of how texts that matter to us show up in our lives is like, there's no text or story or work of art out there that in itself carries the latent ability to change somebody. It's an interaction between art and human that sort of creates that transformation. So it's like, this is a piece of art that you encountered and that totally changed, like made a different world for you. A world that like opened out this art form that like otherwise you might not have encountered.
yes. Yes. And I think that in, getting ready for this, I've been really identifying with Carlotta. I keep saying that,
Mm.
but like the fact that she's like, I'm not going to get killed to sing this role. Because the Phantoms keeps trying to like drop stuff on her when she's singing, and she's like, bye, no. And I think that's like part of my own journey is being like, I don't need to be part of this toxic world, because opera is a toxic world, like a lot of performing art genres, and feeling
Yeah.
like, oh, I don't want to kill myself to try to become this thing or this like dream that I have. It's
Yeah.
like, I'm not going to kill myself for the art, essentially. And I feel like
Yeah.
you could read Carlotta as saying, I'm not going to kill myself to do this.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what? And Christine as well. Like, we read her as like choose, I sort of glibly said she's choosing marriage over art, but she's also saying like, this is nice. I have enjoyed singing these nice songs, but like, I am not going to die for this. And like, marriage to the Phantom is also a kind of metaphorical death. Cause he's kind of a Grim Reaper figure.
Oh, yeah. Like, especially in the
Yeah.
book, he's like, in the book, he's like supposed to be like a corpse.
Yeah. And so there is this sense of like, the question at the heart of it is how much are you willing to give to be great as an artist? And it's really interesting to hear you position this as like, at one point in my life, my answer was anything. I'll go into the creepy wet basement and marry Gerard Butler. Even though he has a incredibly realistic dummy of me wearing a wedding dress and a really pervy peacock bed that's just like, I don't trust that bed. And now, you've reached another phase in your life where you're like, wait, actually, these women were right, and you should not marry the Phantom for your art.
Yes, that's so true. Like I feel like the idea that like if you put all of your life into it, it's gonna be worth it is
Yeah.
such a lie. Like when I was in opera school, they were like advising people to not do anything else except opera. Because they were
Yeah.
like, if you spend literally a second doing anything else, you're never going to be great.
Uh-huh.
Which is such a crazy thing to say, considering like 0.5% of people make it in the opera world.
Yeah, right. But this sort of nobility that is put into the narrative of total self-sacrifice, um, is incredibly powerful, incredibly widely reproduced in texts about being an artist, and like, so I don't know, like neoliberal. Like it's this model of art that's like, it's not a source of collective joy. It's not like a resource everybody has access to. It's not like that it's a thing that like, unless you pursue it at the expense of everything else, you will never be great. And if you become great, it will have been worth every uh, person you cut down and thing you gave up in the process. It's why I generally don't watch any of these movies about like people striving to be great artists, because I just am like not particularly sympathetic with the journey.
Yeah, like the movie. Oh, what was that movie called? The one with Miles Teller. He like wants to be a
Whiplash.
great drummer. That movie was very horrible to watch.
No, I haven't seen it.
Ugh.
When I was, I'm gonna say probably 10 or 11, I was in the like Ottawa Children's Choir. I think it was called Central Choir. It was like a city choir that like sung at municipal events, like we sang at the Remembrance Day ceremony at Parliament Hill, for example. And towards the end of my first year in this choir, which I was enjoying very much, our choir director said, if this isn't your top priority, you shouldn't be doing this.
To kids?
To kids! To kids in a choir! And I was like, well, bye! Because I've just never been willing to make any one thing my life to the exclusion of all else. I mean, work gets real close sometimes, I gotta say, but I'm really fighting it. But like that narrative, particularly around music, is so powerful. And I think it keeps so many people away from, or like cuts people off from, the joy of making music, because they think of it as something that is for a rarefied subclass of naturally talented artists, or people who are going to pursue it to the exclusion of all else, when it's like making music is joyful and wonderful and something that literally every human can do. I mean, maybe not opera singing. That does require some very specific training. And there's pleasure in developing specific skills as well. But like there is this way that we rarefy music and cut it off from being this sort of shared experience that we can like participate in, right? Rather than just consuming.
Yes, it's interesting, like, because opera and like classical music, they used to print out sheet music so people could just perform it at home. So it wasn't this like pinnacle.
Another major component of the spread of the mega musical was that they licensed them really early on for at-home versions. So like you could get, simplified piano versions of Phantom of the Opera, which, fun fact, during my PhD, I lived with a friend who was a voice voice teacher, and singer, but also voice teacher. And of a Saturday night, our favorite pastime was to get drunk and sing the entirety of Phantom of the Opera. She would play the piano. She was the Phantom, and I sang the role of Christine.
Oh my god.
Yeah, it was loud. But to this day, I watched the movie last night. I sing along to the entire thing. You don't want to watch it with me. I'm unbearable.
What's your favorite song?
I mean, my favorite song to sing was Wishing You Were Somehow Here Again. I love that. I love a like plaintive ballad, and that like right at the end when the tempo changes, no more memory, that part, like, love it. But my favorite song in the musical is Past the Point of No Return.
Me too.
Especially in the movie, because it is hot.
It's so hot. I blame Phantom and I blame Twilight for me being attracted to like fucked up men,
Yeah, it is a fuck boy story for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then like when I saw the show, I was really disappointed that the Phantom wasn't more hot. Cuz he's creepy in the show. He's not hot.
Yeah. Yeah, he's creepy, but he sings so good.
Yeah, he does sing really well.
You know what my question is? And we're going to end this part of the conversation on this. How does he keep his mask on his face? No straps on that thing. She hands him that mask. He just sort of puts it back on his face. How? Do you think maybe his scars are permanently sticky?
I mean, the answer that makes the most sense is that it was attached to his wig. But when the mask comes off, the wig doesn't come off. But
And it's not clear in the movie that it's also a wig. Because the mask comes off and he still has the hair. At the end, the hair looks wild. But the mask doesn't have a wig attached to it. It's all very unclear.
But it should have a wig attached to it.
Okay, that is helpful.
Well, originally it was supposed to be a full face mask.
Oh.
And then, like, the original, like, director for the show was like, you won't be able to see his face. Or, like, he won't be able to have any emotion. So then they made it a half mask.
Oh. It should be one of those rubber masks. Like a Halloween mask.
Just like, yeah, like a traditionally attractive man's face, but like rubber.
But like very obviously rubber. Okay, Zoe. I made up a game for you.
Okay. I'm excited.
And I intentionally made this game as hard as I could. So here's what I'm going to do. I am going to give you a lyric from Phantom of the Opera, and you have to sing the next line.
Okay.
And I have made these really hard. As hard as I could. All right, they escalate in difficulty as we go. So we're going to start with, I mean, we'll see how much of a softball this is. So first, lyric. One final question.
One final question?
One final question.
Is it, our passion play is now at an end?
No, it's a question. One final question. How?
How not are we to wait before we're won? When will the blood begin the place?
How long should we two wait before we're won? The nastiest question you could possibly ask somebody. Next line. Try to forgive.
I have no idea.
Teach me to live.
Give me the strength to want. That's from, yeah. Just wishing you were somehow here again.
Yeah, give me the strength to try. Great job. Say you need me with you.
Say you need me with you here, beside you. Anywhere you go, let me go too.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
You little demon.
You little demon, this is what you wanted to see, or something like that. Damn you! You little lying Delilah! Yes.
You little viper!
Now you cannot ever be free!
Damn you! And this one goes, ho 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 ho.
Is that, poor fool, you make me laugh, ha?
It's not ha 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 ha, it's ho 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 ho.
Oh, poor fool, he doesn't know, ho 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 ho.
Yes! Okay. Okay, now we're at the second last. We're getting steadily harder here. Splash of puce.
Splash of puce.
Splash of puce. Splash of puce.
Splash of puce.
Splash of puce.
Da 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 da. It's Masquerade.
And what a masquerade.
Masquerade. Okay. That was hard.
Splash of puce is not as hard as the last one, though. Opera.
That could be anything.
It is on its own as a line. It's a whole line. Opera! Exclamation mark.
I don't know.
To hell with Cook and Handle, it's a scandal that'll pack 'em in the aisles.
Wow.
Opera! I had to make it at least as hard as the trivia we made Gabby answer in the last episode.
I'm so sorry, Gabby.
But your homework for this episode is to go and memorize all of the lyrics to Masquerade.
Okay. And then I'll come over and perform it for you single-handedly.
Oh, thank you. Making Worlds is a Witch Please production. Thank you to our amazing patrons for making this show and Material Girls possible. If you just can't get enough of Witch Please Productions content, head over to our website at ohwitchplease.ca to access transcripts, reading lists, and merch. We also have a whole other show called Gender Playground that is hosted by Marcel Cosman and Rami Marks. Gender Playground is a podcast that is dedicated to the joys of gender-affirming care for kids, and you can listen to it wherever you get your podcasts. You can also follow us on Instagram and Threads at ohwitchplease and on TikTok at ohwitchpleasepod. We also have a Substack where you can read our monthly newsletter, The Monthly Hoot, and special behind the episode content. A big thank you to the folks behind the scenes, producer Zoe Mix, also this episode's guest. Thanks, Zoe. Associate producer and editor, Gabby Iori, also this episode's producer. Thanks, Gabby. Executive producer, Hannah Rehack, aka Coach, and Marcel Cosman, co-founder of Witch Please Productions. Special thanks to Jay Arner and Jessica Delisle, who wrote our theme song. And thank you again to Zoe Mix for designing the Making Worlds logo. Truly, what can't you do? We'll be back next month with a very special treat, a best of Making Worlds episode that you can use to convince all of your friends and family members and employees and bosses to also watch this excellent series. So stay tuned for that.